I'm excited to welcome you all to the webinar. Today, we've got two amazing guests here today with us to share their insights on how to navigate the ever-changing recruiting landscape. First off, we have Peter Clarke. Peter is a talent partner at Accel, a leading venture capital firm that has invested in some of the most successful companies such as Slack and Meta. Peter leads Accel's talent efforts. He focuses on helping Accel portfolio companies build high-performance teams. And Accel is also an investor of ModernLoop. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Leah. Great to be here.
Awesome. And joining us as well is Adam Ward, founding partner at Growth by Design Talent, an advisory firm specializing in strategies for business growth through talent acquisition. Adam has over 20 years of experience in recruiting, including serving as global head of recruiting at Pinterest and Meta. And today, Adam specializes in guiding talent leaders as they navigate change and advises clients on how to sharpen their recruiting processes as they scale their companies. It's great to have you here, Adam.
Hey everyone, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us.
Right. Well, let's jump right into it, into our discussion. We've just come out of a crazy 2023 year. Uh, Adam, you've worked with multiple folks to help them navigate the recruiting landscape changes in the past year. What are some of the themes that you're hearing from the market?
I think 2023 was certainly rocky, and we think 2024 is going to be uneven. I think we are seeing pockets of growth in certain areas that are very well publicized, and other areas and companies that are still reducing teams. So I think that's going to be the normal for a given period of time here, and we think certainly for this year, if not into next. But there are a lot of pressures on recruiting teams or recruiting leaders, and particularly if you think about how companies were impacted over the last 12 months, recruiting teams were disproportionately impacted in terms of reductions in force in the companies. And even within recruiting teams, I'd say recruiting ops and programs teams were further, even greatly more impacted. So if you think about if you're running a recruiting team and you can keep one person on your team, you're probably keeping like a full stack recruiter, and you don't have the luxury of also someone who's maybe running ops or programs for you. And so I think all this is leading to recruiting teams being smaller, but the questions from the business are much more pointed around quality of hire and around do we have the right systems and process in place to hire the best people, right? So in a perception of a market where there's more available talent, hiring managers naturally become more picky, right? And so that might mean process take longer. This is just all more work for recruiting teams. And so that's like when we think about having teams have to do more with less, that's what we mean. There's more questions, there's more work, there's more inbound, there's just more going on, but you turn around and you have less people to do it. And so like that's one of the big things about how we think about this, why we talk about doing more with less. I'll pause there. I'll let Peter jump in as well, but that's like the big theme what we're seeing.
Yeah, and maybe I guess just from our view and more, I suppose we might look at it more as a macro view, but just between kind of early stage companies we work with to some of the later stage, I think it is definitely an impact that's felt across all stages of companies. Where I think at the earlier stages, it just means they hold off in hiring anyone on the recruiting side. You've got founders attempting to do a lot of that themselves. To obviously seeing just the large companies, the FANGs laying people off. So I think there's generally just a contraction, overall in the market, and not surprisingly, I think recruiting teams are the first ones hit, which I don't know. We keep seeing the cycles over and over again. They're also the sort of mad scramble when things start coming back to sort of add recruiters and try to rebuild the team. And so I don't know if there's ever an opportunity in the future where we get out in front of that and it's a little less reactive. But I do think it puts just a lot more scrutiny on what that team looks like, and then again, where is the technology and the solutions and sort of the productivity enhancements and leverage you can get from technology that you might otherwise need to sort of replace what might have been headcount on the recruiting side too. So definitely seeing an appetite for, again, just as Adam was saying, doing more with less, as that first bullet point is, but then kind of figuring out what else is out there to kind of help these teams do more, or maybe it's do the same but with less. Just you know, again, kind of seeing what happens in this market, and trying to still keep the quality bar high, hire great people, but at the same time, not necessarily invest a whole lot in the recruiting engine.
Yeah, totally. And Adam, you mentioned before in our conversations that recruiting has always been a reactive sport, but now it's even more reactive than ever. And so kind of thinking about the new landscape and companies expecting hiring to come instead of yearly, it feels like more of a quarterly planning process now where you got to scale up and down as you need. And how do you kind of structure your team to support that type of volatility in the demands of the company?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there I would probably highlight. So if you think about like the gross hiring you'll do this year for your team or your company, think about that as like a pie chart. How much of that is known right now to you? It's probably a much smaller percentage than it has been in past years, because a lot of the hiring your team might be doing will actually be backfills. And for the planned hiring you do know of, you can pretty certain like that prioritization is going to shift and change with the business as well. So in these volatile times, product roadmaps shift, prioritization for the company shifts, and that all impacts what open headcount that was even planned at the beginning of the year might be shifting out. But a lot of your hiring might actually be backfills, which aren't known yet, right? So we can anticipate maybe pockets of where they'll be, but we don't know where those are. So that's like the reactive nature that we're going to be in for 2024, and recruiting is sometimes in anyway in terms of being delivered a headcount plan and then into action. But there are like things that we can be thinking about of how we can be positioning our team to be less reactive than we normally be. So one is we might know where the pockets of lower engagement are in the team and company, right? So through engagement surveys or other pulse surveys that you might run, you might know where the red zones are. And you might be thinking about like paying attention to that. Second, like you might have leadership changes coming up. With leadership changes are often headcount movement, like either movement out, or when a new leader comes in, often headcount comes with it. So you can be somewhat proactive on that. So what does proactive mean? That means like building pipelines and building relationships a little bit ahead of need. So if you are a SaaS company, or you are a ML company, or you are a consumer product company, you have commonly hired areas that are probably larger teams than others. You can be building pipelines and relationships somewhat in advance and kind of a evergreen mentality. And then when the actually headcount lands, it's not a cold start with those candidates, those relationships. It's more of like, let's pick up the conversation piece, right? And where the pockets of talent are. So you can be doing things preparing yourself from the moment it comes, even if you don't know exactly where that headcount or opening is going to be.
So these is kind of the main themes we're seeing. Obviously, there's a lot happening, but we'll dive into these three in detail in the coming sections of this webinar. So first of all, to talk about doing more with less and the challenges that teams face. Peter, maybe you can speak to a little bit on how you're seeing teams put this to action on how to do more with less resources.
Yeah. Well, and I think it does come down to just the reality of, faced with kind of cutting the team down to maybe, not a well-resourced team, to then still doing what is challenging work, right? So as I like to say, and my colleague Paula had this sort of thing that she would say about recruiting, right, was, when she was running out of Palo Alto, was that it's not complicated. It's just really hard, right? And I think just that being able to kind of understand, okay, there's certain kind of criteria or gating functions in the process, anyways, that do need hands-on like interactions, relationship building, etc. But what are the things you can do, with technology and solutions to give yourself more leverage? And we look at that just across the board, even if we're working with, say, just early stage founders who don't have recruiting teams but are thinking about trying to hire. What are the things out there that they can be using to give themselves more leverage to do? What I would ultimately say is the main job of a recruiter, anyways, is sort of that kind of relationship building to the just kind of candidate experience, to the interactions, to everything that ultimately builds what ideally becomes the sort of ability to win that candidate, right, to close that candidate, versus caught up in the minutia of like metrics and recruiting ops and scheduling and sourcing and just all the things where ideally we can leverage a lot of technology to just help give people far more bandwidth and capacity to focus on the things that really matter, and that ultimately, right, the end result of the whole recruiting process is you actually close and hire someone. So everything you're doing along the way there is like, what are the things that we can kind of put out there from a technology standpoint, so that you are just giving that, the recruiter, and Adam had mentioned that a little bit earlier, of even just this reality we often don't have specialized recruiters anymore. You're sort of working with someone who's kind of got to be full stack. And then again, kind of equipping them to be able to do the job that really matters, which is ultimately hiring people.
Yeah, maybe I can add on to that and like share something additional too. I think something Peter mentioned in our past conversation too is one thing, it's an interesting phenomenon as companies grow and or like recruiting teams grow or become better at what they do. What happens is you get less engagement and participation from hiring managers doing what they should be doing. They almost start to shirk this responsibility because recruiting is actually capable of doing more work, and they do with the work that maybe hiring managers should be doing. So I hope like a silver lining in all of this industry wide is hiring managers actually step up and start to do their jobs more, and there's more shared accountability of hiring managers being the one who cares most about filling their role. And what kind of happens over time is like recruiting ends up caring more about filling the role because like they're held accountable and they're goaled against it, but somehow hiring managers are not. And you see this like divergence over time, this inversely proportional type of behavior happen. And so sometimes pulling away recruiting resources or like limiting the amount of recruiting resources allow hiring managers to step into the role they should have been playing all along, right? Our goal always is to be more trusted advisors versus service providers. And so I would like encourage all of you and challenge you all to like step into that and really clarify the role of a hiring manager at your company. Define that, hold them accountable, get alignment on it, and then your team can focus on some more of that strategic work. So that's one. Sorry, that's a little preachy, but like you should do that if you're not. Second is think of like almost do a calendar audit or do an audit of the work that your team is doing and stack rank it from administrative through strategic. Like stack rank all those activities and think about on those administrative levels, what work can be automated or what tool can you be using to take that work off your team's plate? Because what we'll talk about is like what the recruiting teams of the future are going to look like, smaller and pithier and more technology enabled. You can start now. So you may not have the headcount overall for your team, but maybe you can use a tool like ModernLoop to automate your coordination. Maybe you can use another tool to manage your inbound and help you score and rank inbound candidates. So your time is focused on the most qualified candidates. So look at all that administrative work and then look at tools that can take that work off your team's plate. So you focus on the limited headcount you have on that more strategic, pithy work.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point regarding involving the hiring managers more to make the hire and also understanding what you're spending your time with, which leads us to our second point, which is how are teams restructuring the talent acquisition department in order to do things more efficiently in this environment. So Adam, you mentioned kind of like looking at what you're doing as a manual work and being able to automate that. That's something that ModernLoop does help with. And we've seen a lot of our customers use ModernLoop to supplement. Maybe it's a team that used to have a big recruiting function, but now it's down to 1 or 2 recruiters, and they use ModernLoop as a co-pilot to kind of run that coordination, scheduling, candidate experience, communication function in a fully automated way. And Peter, you also mentioned this about tools that you're seeing your teams portfolio companies use as well. So maybe we could talk about this a little bit more on what else can teams do and how are we seeing restructuring happening in order to build and thrive in this new environment?
Yeah, I can jump in on it. I mean, back to probably touching on the hiring manager involvement too. And I think it's, I guess our recruiting teams being built differently. I think they're, sort of being either, reduced to then brought back. But I guess maybe fundamentally, and this is maybe, and Adam, you mentioned sounding preachy too, and I probably do this as well, but sort of, it seems like we just honestly keep doing a lot of the same things in every market cycle. And, ideally we get a little bit better at it each time, but I think you do sort of see the inevitable trend of when there aren't recruiting resources, it is the hiring manager's responsibility, and they're very involved, right? And then I think as the teams grow, the company grows, right? The hiring managers, you hire more people on the recruiting team. It feels like there's great resources. And for everyone probably listening on this webinar knows, that it tends to, for some reason, it seems like just having one recruiting resource can apparently solve all of your recruiting problems, right? I've never seen another role where there's this assumption that one person can do so much, but tends to happen. But you start to see then the hiring managers step back a little bit, and some of that just based on their time. And, then I think you get into this sort of death spiral of, sort of recruiting teams just desperately trying to figure out what candidates will make it through, recruiting managers saying, you're wasting my time. And, all of those things just leading to what ultimately becomes, I think, a poor candidate experience. And back to what I was saying earlier, which I think is really actually the thing that we really need to be focused on, right? Is what are the things we can be doing that just make sure that candidate experience is the differentiator for you as well, which then I think leads to a lot of better behavior anyways. But just around, if hiring managers also feel that every minute they're spending in the process is valuable because we have sort of shown them, that like the tools, the solutions, we've kind of taken all of the lower priority, lower value stuff off their plate. And then, ultimately there's good alignment with what we're looking for. You're obviously the candidates that are coming through are of the right bar, the quality, but a lot of that comes back to even just, thinking through what are we looking for to begin with, the job specs, right? Getting all alignment there too. So, in terms of very specifically, how the teams are being rebuilt. I don't believe they're being rebuilt with some great strategic initiative around efficiency. I think it's like, okay, well, we're starting to hire again, so we'll start to hire some recruiters. I would love it if you could step back, say, be a little more strategic. But I think that's where I see a lot of it, working with earlier stage companies, is you still have very much the founder CEO, and that you live this, right? Of like, okay, I'm still the main recruiter. I'm responsible for, building this team. And I think that lends itself well, to actually building a really great recruiting engine, because, it's coming from the founder, the CEO, top down. And then, from there, very motivated on what are the things we can do in this process that enable everyone in the process to do the best work, right? To actually focus on the highest priority things, because we don't have time for everything else. So just from sourcing automation, obviously ModernLoop on the, just that, I mean, the scheduling thing, I think it's such an often overlooked thing as well. As bizarre as that is, like the busier people get and the more volume there is in scheduling, it seems like the more we turn that into a manual process. Not sure why, but they're like, oh, we have resources, we'll throw at it. Mm-hmm. When ultimately it's one of those things that technology can solve really, really well. And if you can just, like, people don't care about scheduling when it goes really, really well. And so but obviously it starts to become a potential blocker, right? It's a bad candidate experience when there's not follow-up and there's not, again, just things don't feel like they're moving forward. So it's like it's a simple fix, my opinion. And then, it's one of those challenging solutions where if you're doing it really, really well, no one knows you're there, right? But I think that is just one of the major contributors to the better candidate experience.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Adam.
I was going to maybe add to that. Like, the way I think about this is, I think a lot of people like to compare like recruiting with sales, and I don't love that that connection, except for this. We like, compared to sales, we are in like the second inning of technology and platforms to support recruiting versus sales. So there are literally multi-billion-dollar companies built around sales enablement, support, efficiency, and we do not have anywhere close to that like type of platforms and tools and technology and support and understanding in the recruiting world. So we're just in the second inning. So it's going to come. And like, as recruiting as more and more companies realize the difference between being an iconic company and a logo you never remember is having the right talent at the right time. And more companies are getting that from the early days. And I know Accel makes bets and investments based on founders' ability to build and attract talent. More of this technology and tools are going to be coming. So it's coming. We're just really early days compared to, which is, I think, is a decent comparison, which would be like the sales industry and world, which arguably I think is more important that you have the talent that can do the sales than the sales that can do the sales alone. So I would say that. The second thing I would say is like we're on a decade run here in tech of like growth. Every sector, every industry, every size you say the company was growing. And there was a world where when someone strategically was building a recruiting team, they think about having some percentage of contingency in their team to balance the ups and downs of hiring that naturally happens. But it's been such high growth, it's so competitive for recruiting talent to build a really high performing recruiting team. We all ended up hiring all full-time on our team. So we're all fully loaded, assuming 100% capacity, 100% productivity, and that's just not the reality. And so as teams are being rebuilt now, I see them not only using, better tech stacks and more unified and more technology and efficiency to drive efficiency that way, but they're also using a suite of partners to help buffer on some of that ups and downs of hiring spurts, drop off, things like that. So the next bank will be built over the next 2 years. I don't know who's going to do it. And there's a lot of consolidation happening in this kind of RPO augmented recruiting world. So the next big firm like that will be built here. But I see the most strategic recruiting leaders thinking about having a core senior team, a great tech stack, and then a small set of trusted partners that they use to kind of balance out those peaks when they inevitably come throughout a year.
Absolutely. So let's talk about those peaks in the next topic that we have, which is around shifting from yearly planning to quarterly planning. And that's something that we've always talked about at ModernLoop with automation tool like ModernLoop, is that we can help you scale up and down with your scheduling volumes, right? Like we have all your trained interviewers, we have all your interviewing data, and we can help schedule at an instant, scale up or scale down. And that's something that we've always talked about, but it's actually becoming more of a focus that we're hearing from teams that they need today because of this nature where it's very foggy looking forward. And so you can really only see 3 months ahead of time on what the plan is. And when the company wants hires, they want them now. And it's a sudden priority zero all across the board. Let's talk about this. Adam, what are you seeing and any tips for how teams can navigate this planning process?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. We have a software product that does capacity modeling. So we get to see this data kind of across the industry, sizes and stage of company. And that big trend is exactly what we saw is they weren't even pretending to set out an annual plan on hiring for this year for the most part. And so, it always was a really false exercise. You kind of let's get everyone together in November when they're actually trying to get out for the holidays and let's project what we think hiring is going to be for the next year. It's always round numbers, but we like lock in on a plan. And then like 2 weeks into January, it's like out the window. But there was like this like effort that, kind of went into place to set an annual plan. And then from that, recruiting leaders in an ideal state knew about that plan before the start of the year, but in most cases it's delivered sometime in the early new year. Then we're kind of building their teams around that. And at least you have some kind of like line in the sand of what we think we're going to grow this year. And we just see companies realizing that it is so foggy, to your point, Lydia, they're really doing this kind of quarterly planning and but having better earmarks on like what might unlock or change the headcount plan. Might we open up a new region, add a major customer, not ship a product, ups and downs, right? So we see more scenario planning here versus like, here's a plan versus like, we have high, medium, lows. We see a lot of that. We recommend that of like thinking about different scenarios that could lead to different growth, no growth, or negative growth. So that then when we know what those events are happening, we know how to react because we've already kind of scenario planned against it.
Totally. And to add on that, one thing that we're seeing is when the scramble happens, that's usually when processes break. that kind of used to work in the past, but now it doesn't. Things that aren't standardized, communication that's not standardized, emails that were always one off because someone just kind of knew to send it. And so like what we take a lot of pride on with like ModernLoop is being able to build out those templates on like a per stage basis, building out the candidate experience and the candidate portal on a per job basis. So you don't have to even think about it. You know it's there. It's just going to work for you. And the moment you turn the volume up and you dial it up, everyone gets the same consistent, high quality candidate experience, prep information, communication sent, and no one is being forgotten because of the sudden spikes. So that's something that we're also seeing is how can tools help you with this type of planning where it's so spiky that your processes need to be your kind of your recruiting infrastructure processes need to be set such that it can handle this type of fluctuation.
Maybe, yeah, again, speaking in broad generalities, but I think just what we see a lot of is that point. I mean, the annual plan for headcount, right, tends to get done at a time when nobody's really paying attention or it's kind of finger in the wind. Let's figure out, I think we'll need this. Um, it's amazing to me the number of times you see sort of a headcount plan get put in place with the financial plan, but seemingly as if those two things never like, you never talk to each other. Finance and recruiting, it's almost like we'll figure out the business strategy and then we'll let recruiting know. And I think where we've seen it done well is when you've got, again, hiring managers, business leaders who ultimately involve everyone in the strategy process and, just pull that forward, right? Because where you might have then people in the room who would say, hey, if, we're doing this, again, we're going here, this region, this market, or this is a growth, like getting someone whose expertise is sort of the team build and the headcount. And, it's like, how do we put the right pieces in place to make this work? Have them in the room with you so they can raise those questions, talk about that. But again, that may be just more of a fundamental sea change that needs to be required or needs to happen, for and pulling the sort of people function more into the strategy piece. And that's often a complaint in the people function of just, sort of disconnected from the business. And yeah, I'm not, again, sitting here wondering, how we fix that other than there's obviously great business leaders who have figured that out. But just more, is there things too that you can, and maybe that's where solutions and tools and technology can help, even just from a recruiting team, recruiting leadership perspective, be able to pull that forward. Like they've got sort of data to work from, right? It always feels like the finance team has a whole lot of information and data and spreadsheets and charts and models. Recruiting has none of that, right? And I think if there were ways to, and we probably do have the data, but it's just more how do you put that in a way that enables them to be more of a key part of the planning process, so it's not so reactive, and you can kind of align that. So
yeah,
no, again, I don't.
That's three tactics on that, Peter. So one is like befriend your head of FP&A or head of finance, whoever that is. At Pinterest, I used to buy that person old fashions or bring them old fashioned ingredients a lot because I know they like old fashions, and I want to be in with finance, right? So whatever
get
it
the head of
takes,
FP&A drunk. Is that what you're saying?
whatever it
No.
takes. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see him drink it, but I knew he appreciated it. So that's one. So essentially, like anytime like headcount or planning is being talked about, you want to be elbowing your way in to those conversations and eventually getting invited in. But there's like ways to get invited in. The second is like I would roadshow conversations with. I would have like a regular rotation of the business leaders of just meeting with them to hear like what is on their product roadmap, what's on their sales roadmap, what are you thinking about for next year as a signal to how much growth they might be having, where they might be prioritizing, maybe new regions they might be going into or new lines of product. So to give me like insight on like the types of talent that I might be thinking about. And then the third is like bring insights, right? So when you do get into those conversations, bring information around talent availability, what our competitors are doing, bring the insights that you have as a talent leader, bring value. Don't be just a listener. Don't be the protector of your team. Don't say, no, we can't do that or we can't do that. Bring value to that conversation so you get invited back. So when you get in, don't lose your spot, but you get value like every other business leader.
But that last part's key, I think, too, of just, I mean, you're there for a reason, right, in the company, and you have very specific expertise, a job you're good at. And, I think there's often a tendency to, and sometimes just based on the nature of how oftentimes exec teams view recruiting overall or the people function, right? But it's like, to your point, don't, once you get it, don't give it up, but also, walk in the room like you know what you're doing, and and you have information that you can work from and you can present that. So I think I see that a lot where just folks tend to defer and deflect, and ultimately I think just showing that you're credible, right, that you've got information that matters. And I think once people realize that too, you're very quickly not losing your spot in the room, right?
Awesome. Well, we've had such a great discussion. Thank you, Adam and Peter, for such a lively conversation. We are going to move into Q&A portion. We do have some questions that come in. Let's start off with our first question here. Question is around for the panel. So unlike sales, TA Rec Tech has often seen consolidation of tools. For example, everyone is trying to build the ATS that's consolidated nowadays. And trying to do more than just one thing. Do you see this changing in the future?
Pete, you're an investor in recruiting tech and HR tech. What do you think?
But and I use and it feels to me like it's a really old sort of reference, right? That I would hope have changed, or there's something else to talk about. But so I would love to see a change. I mean, you'd obviously like to see the ability to have sort of a common data platform, right, where you can use best of breed tools for different aspects of the process, just as most companies or functions are able to do. I think generally in the people function, the bigger the company gets, I suppose, the more process and sort of tactically oriented they become. The harder it is to get budget oftentimes, and what you ultimately see is back to the consolidation become, well, honestly, just use a simplistic response of like, well, we're moving on to like an enterprise grade ERP, like, Oracle or SAP. They've got a free thing, like they do people stuff. So we're going to use their module. But I mean, Workday, right? I'm sure, if you were to poll the audience here, everybody, if you've ever used Workday, you absolutely love it. It's the world's best product. Fantastic. Does everything well. It doesn't, but the reality is it's a part of something else. And that just goes back to, I don't know that you can change that mentality until, again, there's a set of tools for the function, that ultimately map really well back to the business, right? But once again, if I'm already paying some exorbitant amount of money for, some tool that works across the rest of the business, whether it works well or not, I'm probably going to use the free product that they give me. So I'm got Taleo, SuccessFactors, whatever, Workday. So yeah. That's probably a depressing view. Just, I do think it gets better. I mean, yeah, we were investors in Segment, and I always had this sort of silly idea, like, where's the, the company that's like the segment of people data, right? Or like, why wasn't actually Segment for people data? Or, just the fact that, like, why are we always also still sort of breaking it down into, oh, this is for this function and this is for that function, when, at the end of the day, most of it probably centers around one particular object, which may be a person, like that. So anyways, does it? Yeah. I don't know about change. I'm optimistic that it gets better.
I hope you have a couple pitch decks in your inbox when you get off this call for this. Like, I'm a hopeless optimist, so like I want to believe that these decisions going forward are going to less be sitting with like the CFO or IT department around these enterprise systems, and more people are going to be more in the room on those conversations. Yeah. But that does start with you as recruiting person, recruiting leader, making sure your head of people or CHRO knows, so that they know to like influence them, so they're getting in the room too. Similar to that headcount conversation, like a strong head of people should be elbowing their way into the room when it comes to these systems and tools. Jeremy, I think it's a good question. I know you're super close to it as like a rec ops pro, but I do think like one interesting thing I see about this consolidation or recruiting tech companies that start out as one thing and then branch out is how they are originally architected, or the original problem they're solving is a lens through which the rest of the experience is like. Yeah. So you can think about whether that's coming downstream from an HRIS and why Workday Recruiter is terrible, or when you look at Ashby now getting into ATS, like what that experience is like. So how it originally starts as a tool and they branch out is like kind of like that architecture, that ethos of like, waking up every day trying to solve this one problem. Now they're trying to solve another problem. It is through that lens, if I'll say. So it's always interesting where they start and then how much of a branch off the other aspects that they are consolidating of recruiting come in, and like what that experience is like. But I want to believe that we'll see like positive consolidation here. And I think you'll see some M&A happening this year and more like consolidation of like two tools that you love into one platform that you already love too. Like that would be great. I'd love to see some of that.
Yeah, and I think it's always a balance, right? Consolidations, it's great, but at the end of the day, it's how can it help your recruiting team? So if you buy all in one, but now let's say you have to hire more recruiting coordinators because the scheduling piece is just not that great, then you're paying money into headcount to do that work. So even though it's consolidated, you're actually paying a lot of money when instead, if you maybe have two tools, then you can actually overall pay less money as an organization to get the same work done and maybe even done better. And so I almost think of like Salesforce as a good example. They're very consolidated, but they're still really great add-ons that people buy, like Outreach to hook in to do the like BDR function, the email sequencing function. And that's because they work better together. They save overall cost for the business. So I think of it similar, kind of like sales with recruiting, that same lens, but always thinking about from what's the budget for recruiting? What's the work that you need to get done? How do you maximize that budget and maximize the output, the impact to the business with that budget?
Well, one thing on the sales tools, I think, well, quickly on that, I think you see obviously sales, because they are on the revenue side of the business, right? They seem to have unlimited budget and kind of do whatever they want, and you'll have this mishmash of tools, and nobody really seems, well, I guess other than it seems like ultimately people end up at Salesforce. But maybe the Salesforce analogy might be good of like what they've done really well, I suppose, is build that whole, kind of partner ecosystem to make up for all the deficiencies in the product. Yeah, I don't know if that's good either. But even just, is the future of the tech stack one where, you're able to, again, demonstrate a huge amount of value around a very specific lens or a piece of that tech stack, right, that you can do really well, and you partner with the best of breed tools. I think that actually works from an ecosystem perspective. And then, I guess from an investor perspective, unfortunately, what that means, you got a lot of investors though going, well, that's just a niche product feature, right? Like we need more. So go build the whole thing. And there you go. And that's why I think, probably not a fair statement, but that may drive some of the sort of like, let's be everything to everybody because I've got to look like I'm going to become the next Workday.
Awesome. We'll have time for one more question. What are your thoughts on consolidation of recruiting operations teams, and how should we think about these types of support roles in the future? Maybe Adam, you can shed some light here since you and Mike at Growth by Design do work with teams around this.
Yeah. I think a couple of thoughts, Carrie. So I think that there is a positive silver lining here with this kind of scrutiny on recruiting resources and things like that. So I think one is that you will see maybe better connection across like all people data too. So as possibly you are having a smaller team, there might be people more branching over to work on broader people ops data or into recruiting ops. So I think that's a net positive thing in terms of like sharing of information, standardization of data, insights, and things like that. Because at the end of the day, we are delivering like recruiting ops. When you think about data, the client is the business leaders, right? And so when they are getting disparate information or disparate data or not on the same terminology or terms, like that's not great for the people function. So I do think there's this consolidation happening. So I love that. Second, I think like recruiting ops is here to stay. Like we have cleared that hurdle as far as like an important function. The most strategic recruiting leaders know they have a right-hand person leading ops in programs. And so it is now like a full-fledged career function. And so we're like, and there are people who specialize in it, like you, Carrie, like Jeremy, like Mike on our team. And so I do think it's here to stay. And I do think like It may go up and down, it may flex a little bit, but the community that we're creating ops is really strong. And I think despite some of the consolidation or even stretching, I think it's gonna be net positive through this, and it's gonna be able to survive even this downturn market that we're in.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining for this webinar. And thank you so much, Peter and Adam, for being here to chat with us today. We'll be sending out the recording for those of you who registered, and for those of you who couldn't make it, we'll send it out to you all as well. And we'll see you next time for the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining
Awesome.
us.
Thank you.
Bye.